right here. Can you see? Okay, so I want to share how to teach quantitative courses. I struggled a lot in the past, but now I think there is some way to actually make a data, intensive or analytic course actually much funner than we had before. So I have been teaching supply chain analytics and developing the materials for analytic courses for quite a few years. To both undergraduates and graduate students, and our approach is kind of unique. So, in the sense that we focus not only on problem solving, like most other programs do, and we focus actually more on problem discovery. That is to define and discover problems in practice. I find it's a lot of fun, and students love it. An employer likes it. And alumni, and also the industry partners really like it. So that's why I want to share a little bit my experience of teaching analytics to broad audience, such as the business audience. Let me start with this graph. I'm sure everybody knows about this, right? So this is the graph made by Gartner regarding 4 types of analytics, from easy to hard, from lower value to high value. Right, they are descriptive, right, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive. And roughly you can see that to the left 2, right, is more or less about problem discovery and data driven. Right, the left 2, let's say prescriptive and diagnostic. Right, it's more data driven. It's more like problem discoveries, and the right 2 is more about model driven and problem solving. Right, so here's my question. What do you teach? Right, let me guess. Based on my experience, and also I talk with all of my colleagues, right? Most people just teach this half, correct? So most people just teach the right half, the prescriptive and predictive analytics, which is great, right? Which is great. It's more about modeling and problem solving. But somehow the left part, right, that is the problem discovery or definition or data-driven, right? That part is somehow entirely missing from our programs or teaching. And part of the reason is what Gartner actually pointed out here, right? It is maybe because they are of lower value, and also they are relatively easy. Well, is that really true? Right? Some people thought otherwise. For example, right, Albert Einstein. And he said, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depend on a solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the right question to ask. That for once I have know the right question, right, I will just take 5 minutes to solve the problem. Well, he's a really smart guy, right? And the second example, right, a second quotation is Charles and Kettering, and he was American inventor, engineer, and businessman. And he was the head of research at General Motors, about 100 years ago. And he said, a problem well stated is a problem half solved. So, at least to these people, right, problem definition and problem discovery is more important and also challenging. So here's my point, right? So after discovering and solving many problems in practice, right, what I find out is, right, problem discovery using using descriptive analytics or diagnostic analytics is not only extremely valuable, but also, right, but can also be very difficult. Now, it's just difficult in a different way. So let me show you a little bit more. I think the key challenge is one of the key challenge is data interpretation. Right, the trick is how to interpret the data to make business sense, right? To make business sense, right? Transform data to insights. That's informs definition of analytics, right? Now, how so? Let's look at this, right? Seeing the same data, right? Seeing the same data. Different people may have different interpretations. Right here, some people say 6, another one say 9. And here some people see just a whole bunch of rocks. And some other people will see a human face gazing at you, right? And the key question is, right, do you really understand the data? Right, let me say it again, do you really understand the data? Okay, and that's actually the most challenging part and also most valuable part. Let me give some examples to demonstrate this. And by the way, this is also the examples I was teaching in the class. And we have much more than this, but I want to show you just 3 examples to prove my point. Right, and the first example is a classical one. That's the case of Dell versus Compaq. Right, Compaq was the market leader around that year 2001, with the largest market share. Right, with healthy cash flows and many patents. Right, but all of a sudden, right, Compaq sold itself. Right, and completely abandoned its strong brand. Why? Right, to understand to answer this question, we have to understand a little bit the computer industry background. We all know that computer companies have the same key technology, the same key suppliers, right, for CPUs and operating systems, and they primarily competing on customer service and cost structure. And so let's look at data. Right. So if you really understand this data, you will know why Compaq sold itself. So the data actually is very simple. You don't need much, right? So let's just pull out the financial reports to see that Compaq has a higher gross margin, right, 23%, than Dell, which is about 20%. But Compaq also has a higher operating cost, right, which is 14% of the sales versus Dell, which is 10%. Because Dell can manage inventories much more effectively, right? So let's do the math. If you subtract the operating cost from the gross margin, we can obtain the operating margin, right? So we can see that Dell outperformed Compaq by 1% in operating margin. And here is the key question, right? Why is this 1% so critical? That Compaq, the market leader, gave up the competition and sold itself. Okay, now this is homework for everybody here. Okay, I'm kidding, but but essentially this is actually it's a business intelligence test, right? Can you really see from the data, right, the answer to this question? I gotta tell you, it took me 5 years to figure out. So I was keep on teaching this, case many years, and all of a sudden I understand why Compaq quit the competition, because it really cannot win. All right, now in the interest of time, and just directly come to my conclusion here. So the answer is you got to see why their gross margin is different. All right, look at the gross margin, right? Compaq is like 3% higher. Why is that? If you have a higher gross margin, there's only 2 possibilities. The first is you get a better deal from the suppliers, right? Which lowers your cost of goods sold. That's why you have a higher, gross margin. Or you have a higher pricing, right? You have a higher pricing. You get the same, deal from the suppliers, but you price your product at a higher price, right? So that's why you have a higher gross margin. And as we said in the slides before, right? They have the same key suppliers. They're also of the same size, right? The deal they get from the suppliers is more or less the same. So the only reason that explains there's a gross margin difference is their pricing. So actually, at that time, Dell has about 10% lower price than Compaq. So here's the point. Right? With a lower pricing, Dell can make more money. How can Compaq compete? Does that make sense? Right? Let's say ASO and I sell the exact same product. Right? ASO has a lower pricing than me, and he is making more money than me. How am I going to compete with ASO? Right? If I lower my price, ASO can lower more and still make more money than me, right? And he's going to keep on getting more market share, and I'm losing constantly. There's no way for me to win, right? Now, you may think this is as a classical example. It happened about 20 years ago, but actually it also happened recently, right? And the recent story is between the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Group, with Intel, right? So in year 2020, TSM, right, was invited to open a new 5-nanometer factory in Arizona, right? Once I heard this news, I immediately have a question. What is that? Does US have the best semiconductor manufacturing in the world, right? We have Intel, we have Micron, we have Texas Instruments, Qualcomm, and so on and so forth, right? Why do we invite TSM? And actually data tells us why. So if you look at data, and so I check the data, then I understand what was going on. And this is very similar to another compact versus stale case. Okay, let me explain. So if you look at data, right, now we did a value driver analysis between the operating margin and the gross margin. Okay, so usually these two margins goes together, right? So if you have a higher gross margin, you tend to have a higher operating margin, which is very obvious, right? However, if you find a counterexample, then you might find an extraordinary case, just like this one, right? So we have the data for 3 years, right? For US and Taiwan, right? For the semiconductor, all the semiconductor manufacturers. And you find out that the gross margin wise, Intel is higher, is much higher actually, it's about 60%. And TSM is about 50%, actually below 50%. But so that means Intel is selling its product at a higher price because their raw materials is, their materials, their equipments come from the same suppliers, right? So they're more or less the same. So what explains such a big gap in their gross margin, their pricing, right? And you can see that even with higher pricing, Intel is making less money in terms of operating margin than TSM. Right, so okay, I have to be clear here. I'm not saying Intel is another compact, okay? But what I'm saying is, right, it's not technology that that set them apart. It's not technology. It is their operation efficiency. If you look closely, TSM is operationally is extremely efficient. All right, now, so you can see data can tell us a lot of things, right? Can explain point out a lot of problems and so on. And my second example is the airlines. We know the airlines get hit hard by the pandemic, but even before that, actually they were in trouble. And you probably know the famous quotation by Warren Buffett on the airlines. He said the worst sort of business is one that grows rapidly and requires significant capital to inject on the growth, and then makes no money. And why did he say that? If you look at data, you understand, right? So in year 2015, which was a good year for the airlines, the cost of goods sold for the airline industry, for the US airline industry, is about 65%. And they made about 15% of the net margin on average. 1 year later, 2016, the cost of goods sold rose to 70%. Okay, their net profit down to 8%. And you know what happened in 3 years? In year 2019, just before the pandemic, the cost of goods sold rise to 75%, and their net margin reduced to about 7%. Okay, you can understand the pressure, right? These companies were facing. And I didn't show you, the data during pandemic, which is bloody. Okay, now, but if you look carefully, not every company in this industry, is a bad choice for investment, right? If you look at, let's say Delta or Southwest, actually they are doing above average. They're not doing better, right? Because they have external control on their assets with a lower other costs, which includes the interest, right? And also, Southwest has great control on the cost of goods sold and sales general and administrative. Okay, my last example is the healthcare sector, which is the hottest industry under the pandemic, and which was also heavily criticized for its outsourcing, right? Especially overseas outsourcing and the resulting supply disruptions, right? The industry was arguing that, we outsource because for cost reduction, right? Well, the question is that really so? So let's look at the data. And if we dive into the healthcare industry, right, we find that there are two industry groups. That the first one is healthcare equipment and services, such as hospitals, and the second one is the pharmaceutical, biotech, and life sciences, right? Essentially, the drug makers. Right, the healthcare equipment and services, right? The cost structure of this industry group is very similar to a manufacturing or transportation company, right? With 60% of the revenue spent on cost of goods sold, right? And 9% in sales, general, administrative, and finally, they only make 3% of net margin, right? So it makes sense to outsource for lower cost of goods sold, right? In this industry group, because the cost of goods sold is such a high percentage of the total revenue. But since it's different for pharmaceuticals, for pharmaceuticals, the cost of goods sold is about 32%, right? The sales, general, administrative is almost the same as the cost of goods sold, which is 27%, and they made about 9% of net margin. Okay, so what my point is, if you outsource the drugs, right, for cost reduction in cost of goods sold, it may not be a great strategy because you are going to increase the sales, general, and administrative cost, which is almost the same as your cost of goods sold. Now this insight is more actually evident if you dive into the pharmaceutical industry, right? To look at the biotech versus pharmaceuticals. And the biotech, the number is cost of goods sold is about 18%. The cost of goods sold is only 18% of the total revenue, while the sales, general, and administrative is 33%. Right? Think about this. If you outsource biotech for lower for cost savings, right, in cost of goods sold, you may not. It could be a very bad strategy because the increase in the sales, general, and administrative cost may be higher than your savings, right, in the cost of goods sold. Anyway, so right, just by reading this data, we can relate to important, right, social economical decisions, right? That's the point I want to make, right? So you probably get the idea of the value and challenge of problem discovery, right, by descriptive and diagnostic analytics. And over time, of course, we implemented and developed a whole bunch of teaching modules, right, to discover and solve problems, right, in supply chains, in various domains such as in sourcing, make, and moving moves and to integration. So such as competitive intelligence at benchmark, right? That is to help company to identify its weakness and strengths, and also identify the problems and the root causes. It's like management consulting, okay, using data. And demand forecasting and planning for pandemic influenza, where sales operating planning for coach logistics. And here we can build a complete, right, logistic network design model using Excel and solve it in 1 second. Right. So and also distribution analytics, right? So using diagnostic, just simple diagnostic and descriptive analytics, we can help Verizon to save $1 billion in inventory, right? Oops. And inventory analytics, instead of just teaching students EOQ models and news vendor models, we teach students how to discover preference in inventories, right? To find out if inventory is important for the industry, right? And if inventory has impact on their financial performance, right? And if they really have an inventory problem, right? By do benchmarking, right? And the sourcing analytics. And sourcing is another place where data is extremely intensive, and also it's great. There's a huge savings, right, with analytics. Because think about how much things you buy, right, from how many suppliers, right? So we made a case for Apple using sourcing analytics to identify the right suppliers, right, for Apple's iPhone, right, the processor CPUs for Apple's iPhone, right? And also we have games like develop games for the Hunger Game, for example, for supply shortage and the rationing, and to simulate the hoarding and panic orders, and also flower games to simulate supply chain contracts and collaboration. Okay, now I know time is limited. So in conclusion, I want to quote Steve Jobs. And he said, if you define the problem correctly, you almost have the solution. Okay, I'm done.